This is the most misunderstood patch of ocean in the world. Here, El Niño and La Niña are born and die in an endless cycle. Here, just 1% of the Earth's surface shapes the weather around the globe, and often it takes the blame for it.
I've been hearing it's going to be a La Niña year instead of El Niño, which we had last year, so really looking forward to the year.
It's off-season around this time. There's no snow at all.
The La Niña, and even though it's a mild one, we're still expecting to be significantly better than last year. Lots of challenges last year.
It's probably one of the best opening days we've had in about 2 or 3 years.
A miserable ski season in North America? That's gotta be El Niño. Intense hurricanes in the Atlantic? It's a La Niña year. You'll hear the same about widespread flooding in Africa, a historic drought in Australia, a bad year for fishers in South America, even reduced sea ice in Antarctica. So, are the accusations fair? And if they are, how is this possible? Here on the West Coast, when people hear La Niña, their first thought is often good ski season. And typically, that's true. Data shows that many West Coast mountains can expect an extra foot of snow in the average La Niña winter. But the story doesn't end there, because in weak La Niña years, a large section of BC's coast can actually expect way less snow than in a typical year. An area which includes the biggest ski resort in North America, Whistler Blackcomb. So what is a weak La Niña anyway? To answer that, we have to go back to that little patch of the Pacific, where El Niño and La Niña form. The area is called Niño 3.4. ENSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation, is one of the most important natural climate patterns on our planet. Most often, we're in ENSO neutral, neither El Niño nor La Niña. But when warmer conditions spread across this part of the Pacific, we enter El Niño. When the opposite happens and it's cooler than normal, we enter La Niña. Different countries have different official criteria, but looking at that patch of the Pacific is generally the most reliable measure. El Niño and La Niña events typically occur every 2 to 7 years. The keyword being typically. Swings between them are irregular and hard to predict. And not every event is created equal. They usually last 9 to 12 months, but sometimes stick around for years. And just knowing we're in, say, a La Niña isn't enough. Is it weak, moderate, strong? That's key information when forecasting everything from the hurricane season in the Atlantic to, as we saw earlier, the ski season on the West Coast. But why? How does the ocean temperature in a remote patch of the Pacific cause knock-on effects around the world? We don't actually know what kicks it off, but once it gets going, it's hard to stop. Let's go back to our little patch of the Pacific. In the tropics, we have the trade winds, which usually blow from east to west. In La Niña years, those winds strengthen, pushing warm waters further west and allowing cold water to come to the surface in the eastern Pacific. During an El Niño, the trade winds weaken, or even reverse, meaning warm surface waters are further east than normal. Whether it's an El Niño or a La Niña forming, the changes to the ocean and the atmosphere feed into one another, causing a sort of feedback loop, driving us further and further into that climate pattern, which can eventually lead to huge knock-on effects that can be felt around the world. All of that means El Niño and La Niña are felt very differently depending on where you are and the time of year. But in many places, they aren't really felt at all. And that's one of the biggest misunderstandings around these climate patterns. They often take the blame for things they didn't really play a role in. Winter in Canada is a great example. Here on the West Coast, El Niño winters tend to be warmer, while La Niña ones are cooler and wetter. But in eastern Canada, as far as we can tell, ENSO doesn't really affect the winter weather. But still, I can't count the number of times El Niño has been blamed for a green Christmas in Ontario, or La Niña for a cold snap, both by people I know and in the news. And there are other effects too, everything from the hurricane season to fisheries. But remember, these are just trends. They aren't hard and fast rules. And yes, El Niño and La Niña are powerful drivers of the global climate, but they aren't the only ones. Remember those maps of snowfall trends in La Niña years? Well, take a look at this one. Across most of North America, snowfall rates are falling rapidly due to climate change. And there's some evidence that climate change is interacting with ENSO swings as well, making them stronger and more dramatic. Although, admittedly, that idea is a hot topic of debate among climate scientists. So, to sum up, El Niño should not be the global climate boogeyman, and La Niña isn't the ski season savior. These are natural and unpredictable patterns that can give us a sense of what might be expected each season. But just a sense, so be skeptical of anyone pulling out these terms with no explanation. Darius, Mahdavi, CBC News, Vancouver.